The judge's gavel didn't just hit the wood, it shattered my life. I'll never forget the smirk on my husband Marcus's face as he leaned in and whispered, "You're nothing but a memory now." I stood there, frozen, watching my 6-year-old twins being dragged out of that courtroom, screaming for a mother the world now called unfit. Marcus had framed me, my own mother had sold me out for a check, and I was left with nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart full of black ice. For 10 long years, everyone thought I was dead, or worse, a ghost living in the shadows. They didn't see me scrubbing floors by night and building a financial empire by day. They didn't see me buying up Marcus's debt, dollar by dollar, until I held his very soul in my hands. But today, as I sit in the back of this boardroom waiting for him to see my face, there's one secret that's going to destroy him more than the bankruptcy. A secret about who really fathered those children, and why I let him win 10 years ago. If you leave now, you'll never know how I turned his greatest victory into his final nightmare. Before going to the full story, please tell me from where you are watching in the comments, like the video and subscribe to this channel for these kind of true stories. The cold air of the courtroom felt like a shroud as I watched Marcus lead my children away. I was 40 years old, a decorated architect, reduced to a danger to herself, because of a masterfully orchestrated lie involving planted pills and a forged psych report. He had planned it for years, waiting until his mistress was pregnant to discard me like trash. I stood on the sidewalk, my hands shaking, watching his luxury SUV disappear into the city traffic while my daughter pressed her small palm against the back window, screaming for her mother. I had no money, my reputation was ashes, and my own mother had turned her back on me after Marcus convinced her I was an addict. I took a deep breath, the taste of salt and copper in my mouth, and realized that the legal system wasn't built for justice, it was built for the person with the loudest lawyer. I looked at the courthouse steps and made a silent vow. I wouldn't just get them back, I would ensure Marcus lived long enough to watch me dismantle his entire existence brick by brick. But first, I had to disappear into the shadows where he couldn't see me coming, and that started with a phone call to a man I hadn't spoken to in 20 years, a man who specialized in making people's pasts evaporate. Living in a basement apartment in a city 3 states away, I changed my name to Elena and started cleaning office buildings at night. It was a humbling descent for a woman who used to design skyscrapers, but it gave me access to something more valuable than gold, information. I spent my nights emptying trash cans in the headquarters of investment firms, reading the memos and discarded documents that the powerful thought were safe. I learned how shell companies functioned, how debt was bundled, and how men like Marcus hid their true assets from the IRS. My back ached and my hands were raw from bleach, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I saved every penny, eating canned beans and walking miles to avoid bus fare, all while tracking Marcus's life through social media and private investigators I paid in cash. He was living the high life, posting photos of his children on a yacht, while my daughter's eyes looked increasingly hollow in every frame. I felt a rage so cold it burned, but I knew that if I moved too soon, he would crush me again. I needed a leverage point, something so devastating that no judge or lawyer could ignore it, and then I found the first crack in his perfect armor. The crack came in the form of a crumpled receipt I found in a trash bin at a high-end law firm where I was scrubbing floors. It was a billing statement for a private medical facility, one that specialized in DNA sequencing and discrete paternity testing, dated just 2 weeks before our divorce. Marcus had been investigating something, but the name on the file wasn't his. It was an alias he used for his real estate holdings. I realized then that his obsession with taking the children might not have been out of love, but out of a desperate need to control a narrative I didn't even know existed. I began to dig into his business partners, finding a web of offshore accounts that led back to a construction project we had worked on together years ago. He had been skimming millions from the pension funds of the city's workers, a crime that would put him away for life if I could prove it. But proving it meant stepping out of the shadows and risking him finding me before I was ready. I spent my days in public libraries, teaching myself the complexities of forensic accounting and international tax law. I was becoming a ghost in the machine, a digital phantom haunted by the memory of my son's voice. One night, while monitoring his firm's server, I saw a transfer that stopped my heart. The transfer was for $500,000, sent to a private investigator I recognized from our custody battle, the man who had found the drugs in my nightstand. This wasn't a one-time payment, it was a recurring, consultancy fee that had been paid out every month for the last 5 years. It was hush money, plain and simple, and it meant that the man who destroyed my life was still on Marcus's payroll. I realized that the frame-up wasn't just about the divorce, it was about keeping me away from a secret so big it required a lifetime of bribery to maintain. I started following the investigator, a bottom feeder named Miller, watching him from the shadows of my hoodie. I saw him meet with Marcus in dark parking lots, their body language tense and aggressive. They weren't friends, they were co-conspirators who hated each other. This was the leverage I needed, a way to turn his own weapon against him. I began to formulate a plan to intercept their next meeting, a plan that required me to use the last of my savings to buy a high-end recording device. But as I sat in my car outside a dingy bar, waiting for Miller to emerge, I saw something that changed everything. Marcus wasn't just meeting Miller, he was meeting my mother. My mother, the woman who had called me a disgrace and refused to take my calls, was hugging the man who had stolen my children. She wasn't a victim of his lies, she was a participant in his scheme. I watched through the rain-streaked windshield as Marcus handed her a thick envelope, the kind that only holds cash. The betrayal sliced through me deeper than the loss of my career ever could. My own flesh and blood had sold me out for a payday, helping Marcus paint me as an unfit mother so he could maintain control of the family estate I had helped build. I realized then that the addiction narrative wasn't Marcus's idea alone. It was a collaborative effort to ensure I never inherited the land my grandfather had left to me in his secret will. They had conspired to keep me locked in a cycle of poverty so they could split the development rights worth tens of millions. The rage I felt was no longer a slow burn, it was a volcanic explosion. I didn't just want my kids back, I wanted to see my mother and my ex-husband standing in the ruins of their lives, begging for a mercy I would never give. But as I prepared to pull away, I noticed a third person in the car, a young girl who looked exactly like me at that age. The girl wasn't one of my twins, she was older, maybe 12, and she was the spitting image of the woman I used to be. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized Marcus had a secret family long before he discarded me. This girl was the reason he needed me out of the picture, she was the true heir he was trying to protect. I followed their car at a distance, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They pulled into a gated community I recognized. It was the house Marcus had told me was an investment property that was sitting empty. He had been living a double life for over a decade, and my mother had been his accomplice the entire time. I spent the next week gathering every scrap of evidence I could find on this hidden family, realizing that the mistress from the divorce was just a distraction, a pawn used to make the split seem like a typical case of infidelity. The real story was much darker, involving identity theft and a series of forged birth certificates. I was no longer just a woman seeking revenge, I was a detective uncovering a criminal syndicate disguised as a family. I knew I had to go to the police, but I also knew that Marcus owned half the precinct. I needed a bigger ally. I reached out to a journalist I used to know, a woman who specialized in exposing corporate corruption. We met in a crowded park, and when I took off my glasses and wig, she gasped. "Elena? Everyone thinks you're dead," she whispered. I told her everything, the frame-up, the skimming, the hidden family, and the betrayal by my mother. She listened with a grim expression, her pen flying across her notebook. "I can help you," she said, "but we need a smoking gun that connects Marcus to the offshore accounts directly. Without that, it's just your word against a powerful man." I knew where the gun was hidden, it was in the safe in the study of our old house, a safe Marcus thought I never knew the code to. Going back there was suicide, but it was the only way to end this. I spent days studying the security patrol schedules, learning the blind spots of the cameras I had helped install years ago. I waited for a night when the moon was hidden by clouds, dressed in black, and climbed the stone wall of the estate that used to be mine. The air smelled of jasmine and betrayal. I slipped through the service entrance, my heart in my throat, and made my way to the study. I reached for the safe, my fingers trembling, but before I could touch the keypad, the lights flashed on. "I knew you'd come back eventually, Elena," Marcus said, his voice smooth and cold as ice. He was standing in the doorway, a glass of scotch in one hand and a silenced pistol in the other. He didn't look surprised, he looked bored. You always were predictable. You think you're the only one who can play the long game? He stepped into the room, the light glinting off his expensive watch. He told me that he had been tracking my Elena persona for months, letting me think I was getting close just so he could catch me in the act of a felony. Breaking and entering, attempted theft. I think this time, the judge will make sure you never see sunlight again, let alone the kids. He picked up the phone to call the police, a smug grin spreading across his face. I stood my ground, my pulse racing, but I didn't beg. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Go ahead, Marcus. Call them. But before you do, you might want to check the balance of your Cayman accounts." His grin faltered for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" he hissed. I smiled, a slow, predatory expression. "I didn't come here for the safe, Marcus. I came here to use your secure home network to authorize the final transfer. You're broke." The look of sheer terror that washed over his face was more satisfying than any physical blow. He scrambled to his computer, his hands shaking so hard he dropped his glass. He frantically logged into his accounts, only to find a series of zeros where his millions used to be. While he was talking, my journalist friend had been receiving the encrypted files I was uploading in real time through his own router. I had used his own high-speed, untraceable line to bypass his firewalls. "You can kill me, Marcus, but the story is already hitting the wires," I said, my voice steady. "The SEC, the IRS, and the DA all have your login credentials and the evidence of the pension fraud." He lunged at me, his face contorted with rage, but the sound of sirens suddenly wailed in the distance. He froze, looking at the window, then back at me. "You bitch," he whispered. "You destroyed everything." I stepped closer, ignoring the gun. "No, Marcus. I just took back what was mine. And now, I'm going to tell you the one thing you didn't know about that night the kids were taken." He stared at me, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. "What?" he gasped. I leaned in and whispered the truth into his ear, watching as his entire world crumbled in a single second. "The twins aren't yours, Marcus," I whispered. "I knew about your mistress years ago. I knew you were planning to leave me. So when I went to the fertility clinic for our second round of IVF, I didn't use your samples. I used the samples from your biggest rival, the man you've spent your whole life trying to beat." The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus looked like he had been struck by lightning. The children he had stolen, the heirs he had fought so hard to keep, were the biological offspring of the man he hated most in the world. He had been raising his enemies' children, pouring his stolen millions into their future, while the man he hated was blissfully unaware. The irony was a jagged blade, and I twisted it. "And the best part? Your rival already knows. He's the one who funded my Elena persona. He's the one who's been waiting for this moment to file for full custody." Marcus collapsed into his leather chair, the gun falling from his hand. He was a man who had lost his money, his reputation, and his legacy in the span of 10 minutes. But as the police burst through the doors, led by the private investigator Miller, I realized that I had made one fatal mistake in my calculations. Miller wasn't there to arrest Marcus. He walked straight over to me and pinned my arms behind my back. "Nice try, Elena," he sneered, looking at Marcus. "The transfer didn't go through. We intercepted the signal." Marcus looked up, his eyes clearing as a slow, evil smile returned to his face. "Did you really think I wouldn't have a failsafe, Elena? Miller here is a lot smarter than you gave him credit for." My heart sank into my stomach. The journalist I had met wasn't my old friend, she was an actress hired by Marcus to lead me into this trap. Everything, the accounts, the files, the sirens, it was all a staged performance to get me to confess to my crimes on camera. I looked around the room and saw the hidden lenses blinking red. I had walked right into a lion's den, thinking I was the hunter. Marcus stood up, dusting off his suit, and walked over to me. He slapped me across the face, a stinging blow that made my vision blur. You're going to a very special kind of prison, my dear. One where people like you are forgotten. He turned to Miller and told him to handle it, which I knew was a death sentence. But as they dragged me toward the basement, a loud explosion rocked the entire house, throwing us all to the floor. Smoke filled the hallway as the security gate at the front of the house was rammed by a heavy-duty truck. Men in tactical gear swarmed the property, but they weren't police, they were private security. A tall, imposing man stepped through the wreckage of the front door, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. It was Julian Vane, Marcus's rival, the real father of my children. He didn't look at Marcus, he walked straight to me and helped me up. I told you she was the brilliant one, Julian said, looking at Marcus with utter contempt. It turned out that I had been playing a double game. I knew the journalist was a fake. I knew Marcus had a fail-safe. I had used the fake transfer as a distraction to trigger a real-time kidnapping alert that Julian's team could use as legal cover to storm the property. The explosion was a distraction to ensure Marcus couldn't delete the actual evidence I had planted on his physical server while he was gloating. Marcus was sputtering, trying to find his words, but Julian just handed him a tablet. The real police are 3 minutes away, Marcus. And this time, they aren't on your payroll. I bought the firm that handles their pension funds this morning. You're finished. The chaos that followed was a blur of flashing lights and shouting. Marcus and Miller were hauled away in handcuffs, their faces pale and defeated. My mother was picked up an hour later at the airport, trying to flee with a suitcase full of cash that turned out to be counterfeit, another gift from me. I stood on the lawn of my former home, watching the empire I helped build burn down in the court of public opinion. Julian stood beside me, his presence a strange comfort. You realized the truth about the kids months ago, didn't you? I asked him. He nodded. The day you contacted me. I didn't believe you at first, but the DNA doesn't lie. They are my world now, Elena. And so are you. I looked at him, realizing that I had traded one powerful man for another. Julian wasn't a hero. He was a shark who had seen an opportunity to destroy his enemy and gain a family. But for now, he was my ally. We drove to the safe house where my children were being kept. When I saw them, really saw them, for the first time in a decade, the air finally returned to my lungs. They didn't recognize me at first, their eyes wary and tired, but then my daughter saw the small scar on my wrist from a kitchen accident years ago. Mommy, she whispered. The reunion was bittersweet, filled with tears and questions I wasn't ready to answer. I spent the next few weeks in a high-security compound Julian owned, reintroducing myself to my own children. They had been told I was dead, then told I was a monster. Rebuilding their trust was harder than any corporate takeover. Meanwhile, Marcus's trial became the scandal of the decade. Every secret, every bribe, and every betrayal was laid bare for the world to see. He tried to claim I was the mastermind, but the evidence I had gathered was airtight. He was sentenced to life without parole. My mother was given 15 years, and she spent her sentencing hearing cursing my name. I felt a strange sense of peace, but also a growing unease. Julian was becoming increasingly possessive, insisting on protecting us with a small army of guards. He had helped me get my revenge, but I started to realize that his help came with a very high price. He wanted me to be the queen of his empire, but on his terms. I was a woman who had just fought for her freedom, and I wasn't about to hand it over to another man, no matter how much I owed him. I began to look for the exit strategy. One night, while Julian was in a meeting, I went into his private study to find my passport. I found a hidden drawer, and inside was a file labeled with my name. It contained photos of me from every stage of my Elena persona, photos taken by people I never saw. I realized then that Julian hadn't just been my ally, he had been the one who subtly pushed Marcus to frame me in the first place. He had orchestrated the entire 10-year nightmare just so he could swoop in and play the savior, knowing I would be so broken that I would hand him the keys to my grandfather's land and my children's loyalty. He didn't love me. He had farmed me for a decade to harvest the perfect revenge against Marcus. My blood ran cold as I heard his footsteps in the hallway. I tucked a small USB drive I found in the file into my pocket, a drive labeled Project Legacy. I looked at my children sleeping on the monitor and knew that the war wasn't over, it was just entering a much more dangerous phase. I turned to face the door as Julian walked in, a glass of wine in his hand and a smile that no longer reached his eyes. "Found everything you were looking for, darling?" he asked. I smiled back, my hand gripping the drive. "Just getting started, Julian. Just getting started."